Hey everybody, it is Rob from Man Sewing, and I bet some of you parents out there have had the same experience I have. That's right, middle of the night, going for a glass of water, and ouch, what is that, Legos between the toes? No, how about a Matchbox car right under your foot as you head for the staircase? Not a great plan. Now, we all love to play, and not many folks like to clean up. So I've come up with this really fun and easy way to help our kids make cleanup kind of fun. That's right, it's kind of a toy or clutter keeper. I'm going to teach you today in your tutorial how to make this giant circular mat with basically 4 holes for a drawstring. So we can just pick up our toys, lift them up, and go hang them up later on, like on a doorknob or a hook or something like that. But that makes cleanup really fun, even for some of those younger kids, right? So you ready to get started? So your supplies for this project are going to be basically 2 fabrics. I started with this 60-inch wide denim. It's a washed denim from Robert Kaufman. Thank you guys, appreciate the supplies. And I also chose the denim because I wanted a little bit of strength and longevity. I wanted something a little bit heavier because we're going to put rocks and cars and Legos and bricks and stuff inside of it. So you want a little something extra heavy there, but easy to sew through still. We also have this really cute print, obviously child themed print. This was from Wyndham. It's called Colors and Count, so I thought very appropriate for our kids to be using. And I've also used some nylon rope. Found this in my garage, but you could probably pick it up at about any hardware store. Roughly 130 inches worth of the rope. And I forgot to tell you that we're using 45-inch squares. So on your print, you're gonna need 1.25 yards. And on your denim, you'll need 1.25 yards, but it starts at 60 inches wide. So your first step is you're going to cut it down into a square. Once it is cut into a square, we're going to then fold it, but we're going to triangle fold it. So I'm going to fold it into a giant triangle. I hope you can see that okay. And then I'm going to fold it again into a giant triangle. And the reason we're doing this is we're going to be able to cut a circle across this arch. Now I'm going to bring it again. So that's about 8 layers. So I'm definitely not going to try to cut this and the print at the same time. I want to try to make sure there's as few ripples, wrinkles, whatnot inside. I'm going to pick this up and start with it on the folded side because eventually I'm starting with my rotary cutter and we're going to cut this arch, but I want to draw it in first. Okay, so let me finish getting that tidy. The easiest way to draw this in, I'm going to come down. We're going to use a 21.5 inch arch. So coming to 21.5, kind of keeping that on my tip right here. Then what I do is I just use my ruler. Let's make sure I stay accurate. And I'm going to draw roughly like 2, maybe 3-inch lines. So this is just going to allow me to eyeball my arch and just keep double checking the tail of the ruler to make sure you're still at 21.5. Okay? Couldn't be much easier. So you can see that there's the arc going across there. Now, let's take this incredibly slow. If you haven't changed your rotary cutter blade in a while, hey, why don't you do that? Because we're going to be cutting through lots of layers, and the sharper the blade, the safer the tool. So let me give you a second for that. Time's up. Okay, here we go. Opening this up, I have no ruler to protect my hand, so I'm going very slow, and I'm keeping this left hand well out of the way. I missed a little chunk there, so I'm just going to press in nice and deep as I go, and I'm constantly flattening it out and smoothing it. And the biggest, most important part of all of this is that you get both your denim and your print about the same. Real close to the same would be perfect, right? So when that's done, it's going to open up to form a fantastic circle. And you can see I've already done that also with my print. Let's double check to make sure they're real close. Oh my goodness, I couldn't have done much better if I tried. So before we start stitching these bad boys together, right sides together, we need to do our buttonholes, or the buttonholes are what allow that rope or the strapping to come out for gathering it up later. The buttonholes are only done into the denim, and we're going to do a series of 2 buttonholes 4 times, so 8 technical buttonholes. And if we open this up right now, let me grab my Sharpie, okay? I'm going to go to the inside of my fabric. These are just going to be my guidelines. So I should have one grouping of buttonholes there, one grouping of buttonholes here. I'm folding it right on those lines. And this, I mean, these could be off by inches and it really wouldn't matter. But I'm going to have another group of buttonholes here. And I'm going to have my last group of buttonholes here. So the 4/4 of my circle, each getting 2 buttonholes. And those buttonholes should be at least an inch, if not an 1.25 inches long, so they're easy to fish that casing through. Okay? I'm going to do the buttonholes on the right side of the fabric, and my machine's already set up for that. If you have never done a buttonhole on your machine, definitely give it a practice run before you start. Okay? And so I'm just going to get set up. I'm making sure that my line, these are going to be about, let's say an inch, maybe an 1.5 inches apart. And for me, I'm going to start in, and my fingers are crossed, and I'm going to start nice and slow, and here we go. Okay, now here's a great trick. Whenever you're doing something kind of industrial, it's a great idea to do your buttonhole twice so that it adds extra thread and extra thickness. So I'm going to put my needle in the up position. I'm going to lift my foot, come right back to the beginning of that buttonhole, line it up, and I'm going to start again. Couldn't have been much easier unless you were doing all of my buttonholes for me, right? So let's get this on out of here and talk a little bit more about what just happened. First of all, we have a terrific buttonhole. Secondly, I should have mentioned this earlier, I wanted at least 1/2 inch, if not an inch back from the edge, because remember, we're going to take this in just a moment after all my buttonholes are in, and these will be stitched right sides together with at least a 3/8 seam allowance, okay? So we want to make sure that that's going to still be exposed, okay? Then the other thing is, if it's easier for you, my machine, the buttonhole starts and then runs backwards. So I make one kind of on the fly. The second one, I want to know where I started from. So now I've come in here and I go, look at that. The beginning of that buttonhole was 2 inches in. Once you've determined that distance, like I said, about 2 inches from the end point and at least 3/4 from that outer edge for your first buttonhole, now you can go around the entire project and line out the other 7. What does that mean? Well, check this out. Okay, so I'm going to fold this back, and that was my center-ish mark. And remember, this is not rocket science for this because we're not even putting buttons through these. Okay, now the tricky part for me, I like to mark on the top side, and I just want to say that I'm going to keep myself roughly 2 inches apart, and then I'm going to go roughly 2 inches in, and I'm going to put another Sharpie marker, and that Sharpie marker there is going to get buried under the thread. And that buttonhole will start there and come backwards on my machine. And you all know every machine has got a different buttonhole setup and a different way that the foot works. So, hey, you know what? That might be a good quick tip. Maybe I could cover a couple of those down the road for you. Okay, so I'm going to come over here. This is now kind of that center mark, and I'm not marking on the top side because I don't want to see that later. And the buttonholes are always prettiest from the top. So now I'm going to come over, remember there's that mark. I'm going to come over here, I'm going to put a Sharpie, and then I'm going to come about 2 inches, eyeballing it is just fine, and another Sharpie. Okay, so you've got that, so that'll be 2 more buttonholes, and I'm going to do the rest to the other sides, and then I'm going to sew all those buttonholes, and I'll be right back for you to show you how to cut those open. How's that sound? All right, well that didn't take too long, right? But I did just do 8 buttonholes twice around, so 16 buttonholes worth of sewing time. I want to show you how I cut my buttonholes. There's a few different ways out there of doing it, using different cutting tools that are like a little X-Acto knife or a little razor blade. I really just use a nice sharp seam ripper. Before I slice this open, let's just make sure you totally understood what I was doing earlier. It was an 1.25 inch long buttonhole, and it was 2 inches from the beginning to the edge of the fabric, okay? And I went around it twice to make it nice and secure. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my seam ripper and I'm going to poke it in at the back, and then I actually do kind of a little bit of a wiggle, and I slow way down. I don't cut all the way to that end. Let me do that again for you. And you try not to cut those satin stitches you've just done. Beautiful, just like that, right? Very easy. So I've just used a seam ripper. Let me put that back over here in the Somando vest for myself. Now, from this point on, it's time to start making the project, right? So we're gonna put our right sides together, and it's a circle, so it really doesn't matter where I grab it. I'm gonna kind of start out in the field or between two sets of buttonholes. And this first series of stitching, like I said, right sides together, and we are gonna use about a 3/8 seam allowance. When you're quilting, you're using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and a lot of patterns are based off of that. When I'm doing my regular sewing, I often use 3/8 because I get a little bit bigger bite. The bigger the bite, the stronger that seam is gonna be. And remember, we're carrying rocks around in our little satchel, okay? So here we go. Before we approach our sewing machine, a couple of things I want to point out just from my personal experience. The denim has a little bit more stretch than the print, so my print is going to actually be down on the feed dog side so that my fabrics travel as nicely together. And you know I'm a bit of a slob when it comes to the machine. I don't normally pin, I just kind of go for it. But you'll see I've used some wonder clips because I've got such a large series of circles. I want to make sure that everything stays as nice as possible. If something gets a little bit off, you could always do some little feeding and gathering into the seam if you needed to. And remember, the buttonholes are already made, and if one of those hit your seam allowance, again, it's going to still allow us to pull our casing or our rope through our casing. So I'm over here with about a 3/8 inch seam allowance. The print is against the feed dogs, and I'm just going to slowly start sewing. I've got my machine in needle down position in case I need to stop. And I'm going to bust this thing into high caffeination mode, finish it out. I'll be right back. Okay, as I'm coming into this last seam, I have left about a 6 to 8 inch opening so I can turn this right sides back out. Let's take a moment and do some back stitching there, just to make life a little easier. And I will finish that opening closed with a top stitch all the way around the circle. But so we've got our opening, and I'm just gonna reach in and start pulling it out. And then I'm gonna top stitch around this real quick. And let me get to the machine and I'll show you how that's gonna look a little bit different. Now, if you wanted to go back to your 1/4 inch seam allowance here, that'd be a pretty cool trick because it'll look real sharp right along the edge. You can even move your needle over further. I think I'm gonna do that. So I'm moving my needle right over towards the edge. Now I'm also gonna get all my fabric nice and flat here. And I'm gonna make sure that my seam allowances are tucked in to the area where I just opened all those fabrics out. Nice little pinch, making sure it's nice and tidy there. Okay, now here we go. We're gonna do our top stitching. I'll show you what it looks like when I'm all done. All right, so I'm just coming into the end of that top stitching. I'm going to sew over by about an inch, back stitch, and that really locks all of that in. Now, let's think about what we've really done here. We have taken a really nice seam, and then we've also done a top stitch. So that's like 2 layers of stitching, which really reinforces it. Remember, we're building a rock carrying sling or a Tonka truck carrying sling, so we need some support. Okay, so that is going to be nice and strong on our outer edge. Our next step is going to be building a casing for us to run our drawstrings through. That casing is going to need to fall on the other side of the buttonholes. The way I do that is I come right back over to the machine and I've taken a piece of blue tape. And that blue tape is going to be 2 inches from my needle to that outside edge. Yeah, this outside edge right here. Let's do that. So that outside edge, that's 2 inches distance. And here it is on the blue tape on the machine. And then now I am literally just going to keep my hands, keeping my fabric nice and secure so it's not rippling too much. And we're just gonna now slowly sew around. And if you can't see, I am looking right here at that blue line as I'm sewing along. Go a few inches at a time, stop, needle down, kind of reset. Once I've done this once, I'm going to move my needle position over just a slight, and then I'm going to do it again so I have a nice looking like parallel line of stitching. I'm doing 2 layers of stitching there also for strength. All right, everybody, here we are back after all of the top stitching is done and the buttonholes are done. All we have to still do is run our rope through the casing, but let me just point it out. There's that first top stitching, the buttonholes, there's the first row, and then I just moved my needle over and hug that line, and so I've got a really nice crisp. And I forgot to point out earlier, I chose orange thread because it matched the print, but I also thought, the orange would look like an old pair of jeans or something fun as well. Now, before we get started with running the cord through the casing, I want to show you a trick, and you may not know this or not. I am using a nylon rope. Now, nylon rope is nice and strong. It's a little bit slippery, and that's why I've chosen it. At one point, I actually tried to make the scraps of the denim for the pull cord, but I found the denim on the denim didn't slide real smooth, so I went to the nylon rope. And with nylon, when you cut it, it's going to have a tendency to kind of unravel and do weird things. So this is just a good skill to know anyways. Okay, so once you've cut it, you take a lighter, or you can use your stove, and you're just going to give a little bit of heat. Let it cool, 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 and then pinch it and roll it. And now what that is that's never going to unravel. That's a real good way of having your rope keep from coming loose at the end. I used about 130 inches of rope. If you're not sure, don't trust me on the 130. Leave it like, let's call it 4 miles of rope on one side, run it through, and then cut it off is really the easiest way. Supply from the big toolbox here. We're going to use a very large safety pin going up through the center of the rope because I want as little drag as possible. Okay, now here's the trick we're going to do. We are actually going to eventually have the rope come over these loops in my buttonhole. So I'm going to run in one, and I'm going to start going to the other side. If you've ever had a hoodie sweatshirt come out of the dryer and the pull cord is not there, you've done this before, right? So I'm just feeding this through as we go. Now I'm coming towards another series of buttonholes. Watch how I handle that. Make sure when you're melting your cord that you have made it a little bit smooth. I kept feeling a little snag there. Okay, but here's what I want to show you. As I come over here now, I'm come through the casing and I'm going to expose that rope so it goes just like that, and then I'm going to keep on keeping on. So this is just going to keep plugging through here. Once you have all of your rope through the casing, make sure you lay it as flat as possible, the entire bag out, and then figure out your measurement. Okay, so we have plenty to work with. We're going to take and we're going to cut this. Okay, now I'll melt this when I'm done. Now I'm going to take this and we're going to take a little extra, would be not a bad thing. We're just going to take, loop around twice and through, and now you have a nice double 8 knot, right? So that's a very professional looking climbing knot. So if you ever needed to do some rock climbing with your bag, at least you would look cool if you showed up. Okay, now we're going to trim these down. Perfect. One last trip with the lighter. Careful, that's hot. Okay. Now do this, like you said, let it cool for a second because you will burn yourself if you grab it right while it's melting. Cool, 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 and finish. Just like that. How cool is that? Okay, now ready for the test? I'm so jazzed. Okay. I happen to have a few more toys with me. So all over like the floor like all good toys would be, right? We're gonna spread these out. And now when it's time for cleanup, we're just gonna grab 1, 2, 3, and 4 like that, and just give it a little bit of a snug. Toss it over your youngster's shoulder, right? Make sure they've got their jammies on and their teeth brushed. They've gone potty, went up and read a story, and then they're catching their very last episode right before bed of Man Sewing.